Wow, happy Mother's Day to everybody. Now, I don't know if I've met you before. We've been coming to this church for just over a year with my husband Simon and my two children, Emiliana and Caleb. And so we are slowly getting round you all to introduce ourselves, but it's taking a while. We have the privilege of leading the community in South Woodham. And I'm really excited that I've been asked to speak today, so thank you for having me. Now, I don't know what constitutes a dad joke, but being Mother's Day, I'm going to try some mum jokes. Is that all right? And I don't know what constitutes a mum's joke either, it's just ones that make me laugh. Okay. Why did the chicken cross the playground? To get to the other slide. Oh, a few more groans and laughs. Okay. What about this one? Why did the scarecrow win a Nobel Prize? He was outstanding in his field. I like that one. Okay. This one is my all-time favourite joke, and it cracks me up. What side of a zebra has the most stripes? The outside. I liked that one. Okay. Why are balloons so expensive at the moment? It's inflation. Inflation. Two more. What do you call a bee that can't make up its mind? A maybe. Last one. Why do bicycles fall over? Because they're too tired. Okay. So, I've been asked to speak today, and what I want to do is I actually want to tell you now some facts that are anything but a joke. This is what we're doing today. We're navigating the speed of life, why slowing down matters in our fast-paced world. So let's look at some facts. Overall, stress levels in the UK are rising year on year with a 14% increase since 2022. 1 in 6 young people have a probable mental health disorder. Nearly 2 in 3 adults are experiencing mild symptoms of anxiety and depression, and that's up 11% from last year. Over 1 in 2 workers in Britain say they feel very or fairly stressed at work. Almost 4 in 10 workers say they feel stressed when they think about work outside work hours. And then get this, 3 in 10 say they feel very or fairly stressed even when they're not working and even when they're not thinking about work. Over 6 in 10 UK workers didn't take all their annual leave in 2022. Over half. Just let those statistics sink in for a moment. But that's out there, right? That's not in here. Now, it's really hard to get statistics on Christians, but one recent study said this. 1 in 10 church leaders reported that their emotional health was poor or very poor. 1 in 10. Think about how many churches there are in Wickford, how many churches there are in Essex, how many churches there are in the world. That's massive. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be thinking about our pace of life. We're going to be thinking about how quickly or how slowly we walk through it. And a disclaimer right at the start, I have not got this sorted. Okay, I have been trying to process this for the last year or so, trying really hard in the last 3 months or so, but I'm still very much on this journey. So I want to take you back to 1879 and a man who lived at this time. Let me tell you a bit about him. He hated sleep. He worked long hours. He worked 15 to 20 hours a day, only sleeping for 3 or 4 hours a night. He regarded sleep as a waste of time. He said, and I quote, "It's a heritage from our cave days." So who was this workaholic man who hated sleep? Any ideas? Thomas Edison. What did he create in 1879? The light bulb. A way of tricking us to not sleep. Before light bulbs were used regularly, then what used to happen is you used to do your job. When the sun went down, then you would rest and sleep. And then you would wake up the next day. So people would average about 10 hours sleep a night. Over the last century, what's happened is that's reduced by 20%. And now we only average about 8 hours-ish. But I reckon it's less than that. Put up your hand if you know every night you sleep for 8 hours or more. 5, 6. And I know it might be a season thing. So if you've got young children, I remember those days. But it's worth being aware of. Another change over the last 150 years is the explosion of information and its accessibility. 150 years ago, I would only really have known what was going on by a letter, by reading the newspaper. That's the only way I'd have known what was going on outside of my community. But now, how different is it? We carry mini computers around in our pockets. With a few taps, we can see what is going on in all over the world. Every war, every humanitarian crisis, every political problem, every celebrity scandal. That's a lot. And actually, this is the truth. Our brains are not designed to cope. They're not designed to process that amount of data. What can happen is it can leave us feeling anxious, overwhelmed, stressed, disconnected. You know, we hear about wars and natural disasters and acts of violence happening thousands of miles away, yet often we can feel powerless to affect change and also to know how to pray. Or is that just me? You know, I believe this is one reason why society is in crisis. Let's jump forward to 1923. And in 1923, a bunch of scientists and science fiction authors and newspaper reporters met and imagined what the world would be like 100 years later. So they were imagining 2023, our history. Let's have a look and see what they said. Okay, appearance. This is what they thought. It's now predicted by the year 2023, only a mere stretch of a century ahead, women will probably be shaving their heads and the men will be wearing curls. Also, the maidens may pronounce it the height of style in personally primping to blacken their teeth. Won't we be pretty? They got that wrong. What about life expectancy? What did they say for that? By 2023, the life of a man could be increased to 100 years. In individual cases, it could be increased to 150 or 200 years. But what I want to focus on is their work-life expectation. An electrical expert at that time says this: the time is coming when there'll be no more drudgery and that people will toil no more than 4 hours a day, owing to the work of electricity. He visualises as an amazing transformation in life. Every city will be a spotless town, and that is the work of electricity also. What do you reckon about that? It was so wrong. The introduction of time-saving devices like the washing machine and lately the air fryer, what was supposed to happen is it was supposed to make our lives easier, to give us more leisure time, more chill time, more relaxation time. But it hasn't. And actually, some of us find ourselves more time poor than ever. We're constantly rushing from one task to the next, juggling work, family, social commitments, with little room for rest. And even when given the opportunity to take a break, as we've just seen in those statistics, so many of us, more than half of us, refuse not to. But this is not a seminar, this is a preach. So what does God have to say about this? So if you have your Bibles, if you would like to turn to Mark chapter 5, verse 21 to 43. Mark 5, 21 to 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came to him. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people crowding against you, his disciple asked. Yet you ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the man, knowing what had happened to her, the woman, knowing what happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, John, and the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father, mother, and the disciples who were with him and went to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up, began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jesus seemed to live his life constantly being interrupted. And in this passage, it talks about two of these interruptions. So Jairus was a synagogue leader, a very similar position actually to a church leader today. Imagine the scene. His 12-year-old daughter was dying. Imagine the panic and the urgency he was feeling. I've had 2 times where my children have freaked me out, okay? The first time was a few years ago. Emiliana was jumping on the trampoline and she landed on her neck. Time went slowly. My heart beat really fast. Didn't know what was going on. With Caleb, it was just a few weeks ago, he was sucking a lollipop. The lollipop was disconnected from the stick and it got caught in his throat. Oh my word. You can't imagine, unless you've seen a child, you can't imagine. And they are really two tiny examples, but even those tiny examples, I was like, what is going on? And I can just imagine that Jairus would have felt very, very similar. It says, doesn't it, that he pleaded earnestly with Jesus to go with him. Just imagine the desperation in Jairus. And then imagine the joy and the relief when Jesus says, yes, I will go with you. Whew. But crowds regularly follow Jesus, and this was no exception. They all wanted to get close to Jesus, and that's where the second interruption comes. One touch from a woman. A woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, and according to Jewish laws at the time, anyone who touched this woman would have been ceremonially unclean, as per the laws outlined in Leviticus. She could have faced, this woman, we don't even know her name, she could have faced severe consequences for her illness. She could have been divorced from her husband. She could have been expelled from her home, shunned by society, stopped from interacting with her former friends, even excluded from the women's quarters in the temple. But get this, no one was able to touch her without becoming ceremonially unclean. I was talking to the person next to me at the start of the service about COVID and how we measure everything by COVID now. But I remember when I first got COVID, I was doing the right thing and I was self-isolating in my bedroom. And I was in my bedroom for 7 days. I didn't want to infect my family. For me, what was worse than COVID was no physical touch, because physical touch is my love language. Imagine this lady, no physical touch for 12 years. Jairus was desperate, but so was this lady. Now, it doesn't talk about this in the Bible, but I can just imagine the scene. So Jesus is having this conversation with this woman, but who's still standing there? Jairus. How's he still feeling? Panic? Fear? I would imagine if I was Jairus, I would be saying, oh, come on, Jesus. Come on. My daughter is at home. Seriously, let's go. He might have said that. I don't know. It's not recorded in the Bible. But you can imagine his panic, especially as Jesus was talking to a lady that actually was at the bottom of society's hierarchy, and he was near the top. You know, Jairus had his timeline he wanted Jesus to operate on, but Jesus had his own timeline. And I think sometimes I can feel a bit like Jairus. It's that I want Jesus to do things according to my timeline, but actually Jesus works to his own. So what did Jesus say? He told Jairus 2 things. First, stop being afraid. Has Jesus ever said that to you? Sometimes Jesus asks us to do things that we don't understand, and it doesn't make sense. But fear and faith don't go together. He had to put away fear, and then he was told to believe. Not believe and try and make sense of the situation, just believe. When they got to Jairus' house, there were a load of people who were weeping and wailing because Jairus had just been told that his daughter had died. And at that time, it was customary to hire professional mourners to come to your house, to add to the atmosphere of grief and pain at a funeral. Now, we can't imagine that because these mourners, they're not empathizing with what's going on. They're not feeling sad. What they're doing is getting paid. It was a job to them. But they only grieve superficially. And at the end of the passage, it says how they turned their grief to ridicule when they laughed at Jesus. You know, the poorest of men were required by common customs at that time to hire a minimum of 2 flute players and 1 professional mourner in the event of his wife's death. So it's possible that Jairus, you know, the rank of a synagogue leader, he would have been expected to hire a lot of people. And this can be seen from the passage. And obviously Jesus healed Jairus' daughter at the end. So let's take a closer look at these 2 characters. So Jairus had 12 years of love and relationship with his daughter. This woman we don't even know her name, she had 12 years of disconnection and illness. Jairus was probably wealthy because of the amount of people, the professional mourners he had at his house, as well as the role in the synagogue. The woman was poor because she spent everything on doctors. Jairus came publicly. The woman came secretly. Jairus' daughter was healed secretly. The woman was healed publicly. Jesus had love and compassion for both. 2 daughters were healed that day. Jairus' daughter, and who did Jesus call the woman in verse 34, I think? Daughter. It's amazing, isn't it? So amazing. From reading the Gospels, my understanding is that Jesus' lifestyle was a slow one. He was never rushed. He was never in a hurry. Not once does it say Jesus ran anywhere. And this isn't to say Jesus was lazy. He certainly wasn't. He had the biggest mission of anybody ever. He got stuff done. But he had margin in his life to be interrupted. And when he was interrupted, he responded with love and with grace. When you're interrupted, how do you respond? With love and grace? I don't all the time. Especially when my diary's too full and I'm overwhelmed. It can be irritation, frustration. So why is it important to slow down? As a life group, we're currently looking at some material from an American church leader called John Mark Comer. And I do really recommend his teaching. And we've just finished exploring the practice of Sabbath. Now, I don't know if you regularly practice Sabbath, but it's incredible. We are still journeying through it. We haven't got it nailed, but it's so important. We've learned as a community to stop, rest, delight, and worship. We're learning to say no to things and to give ourselves permission to rest, and to rest well without feeling guilty. And it's interesting that I'm doing this on Mother's Day, because for me as a mum, guilt is something that I really experience. I'm sitting down, reading a book or doing something. I'm like, I should be doing something else. And we can often feel guilty. But actually, that's not what God asks us to feel. We were never designed to go 15, 16 hours a day doing stuff. What we were designed to do was to rest and operate from that place of rest. You know, it's amazing. Some of our group are even doing this study with their non-Christian husbands. So good. One quote mentioned in this teaching is from a late American church leader called Timothy Keller. And it says this: because the world is full of ugly things, we need Sabbath to feed our soul with beauty. So why slow down? I think there are 3 reasons why it's important to slow down. The first one, to be with God well. The second one, to be with others well. And the third one, to be with ourselves well. Let's look at these as we come into land. To be with God well. Jesus withdrew to lonely places. He got away from it all. He knew was enough when enough was enough, and he needed to get away and be with God. He got away from his disciples. He got away from crowds. He got away from expectations. It's so important that we carve out time to be with God and hear his truth for our lives rather than all the rubbish society is shouting at us. To be with others well. Responding to other people from a place of overwhelm, as I've just said, is not good. Last week, Rob said that we need to do better at loving others. And I believe we need to slow down in order to do that. Mother Teresa once said, "Never be so busy as to not think of others." And the last one, to be with ourselves. And this one, I think, is either going to be really easy or really tricky, depending on who you are, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Now, I used to think if you're an extrovert, that just means you've got a load of confidence. But that's not true. It's about where you get your energy from. So if you got your energy from being around people, you're more likely to be an extrovert. If you get your energy from being by yourself, you're more likely to be an introvert. Extroverts will find this harder than introverts. But silence and solitude is an amazing space where God speaks. It's my favourite spiritual discipline. But it is also a scary place because you can be left with your own thoughts, your own feelings. And in a society where we're constantly being distracted, that can be quite a difficult place to be if we're not used to it. Corrie ten Boom once said, "If the devil cannot make us bad, he'll make us busy." Do we agree? You know, we live in a culture where busyness is almost treated like a badge of honour. How many times today, when you came to church, have you said to someone, "How you doing? How's your week been?" And how often is the first word, "Busy"? Both busyness and sin do the same thing. They cut off our connection with God and other people. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, if that's okay, guys. And Gary, if you're okay to play quietly in the background, that would be great. I want to read one more passage to you. And this passage is from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, at the home of Martha and Mary. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened his home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work for myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset about many things, but few are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and this will not be taken away from her." Now, I am a Martha by nature. I thrive on busyness. I thrive on having people in my home. I thrive on doing stuff. But I know I need to be more like a Mary. I need to prioritize time to sit at the feet of Jesus as I am. Not perfectly, but as I am. You know, Jesus was productive. He got stuff done. But he spent time with God and the community around him. I want to be like Jesus. if you're able, I would like to invite you to stand, please. I don't know your situation. I don't know if right now you're thriving in life or whether you're overwhelmed, whether you're juggling too much, whether you've got too much in your head, whether you are operating from a place like Martha or a place like Mary. But today, what I want to do is invite you to slow down and to operate from that place of rest, because that is the only place where we are going to do our best for God, operating from that place of rest. So normally we stand up to respond, but because of what we're talking about today, I just want to invite you to sit. If you know today that you need to slow down, either in your headspace at work, other commitments at church, can I say it? Whatever it is, if you know that you are not operating from a place of rest and you need to be more like Mary, then please sit down. That is the majority of us in here. That's a lot of us. So what we're going to do is we are going to respond to God from this place of rest. Communion is open. If you believe in Jesus, if you believe that he is Lord, then you are very welcome to come and take communion in our church. If you want to just sit and listen to the worship by the worship guys, please do that. If you want to stand and worship, do that. But use this as a time, this quiet, slow time to get stuff right with God. So together, let us right now be still and know that he is God.